Everyone and their cousin seems to be talking about this thing called Project 2025 during the 2024 election season. So I thought I'd join in on the party by using this video to talk about what an implemented Project 2025 would mean for rail transit. Project 2025, whose full name is Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, is essentially a playbook for what policies a conservative presidential administration should pursue. In other words, what policies a second Trump administration should pursue, since former President Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for President of the United States. This playbook, for the record, is organized by the Heritage Foundation, a well-known conservative think tank with an annual revenue around $100 million. There are a couple of notes I should make about Project 2025 before getting into the meat of this video. First, former President Trump, who would become president if he defeats current Vice President Kamala Harris in November, has distanced himself from Project 2025. But take that with a grain of salt, because Trump, like many politicians on all ends of the political spectrum, isn't exactly known for his honesty. Take it with an even bigger grain of salt, because his own vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, praised a key leader behind Project 2025. Second, Project 2025 talks about policy priorities on a wide range of issues, such as abortion, LGBTQ+ issues, and the economy. I am not going to talk about the entirety of Project 2025, because the video would become insanely long, not to mention drift away from what this channel focuses on, which is advocacy for better rail transit in the United States. Rather, because of the content focus of this channel, this video will focus on the parts of it that pertain to what it means for people who use, or want to use, rail as one of their means of mass transit. So what would a fully implemented Project 2025 mean for American rail transport? I'll answer that question in the rest of this video by breaking this up into two sections: what it would mean for Amtrak, and what it would mean for more localized rail systems, such as regional rail systems, light rail systems, and subway systems. Let's start with Amtrak. It should be noted that Amtrak is not mentioned at all in the Project 2025 document. What this tells me is that Amtrak is a very low priority, if it is a priority at all in the eyes of the Project 2025 people. As to whether that lack of attention towards Amtrak is a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not going to speculate. My hope is that the lack of prioritization of Amtrak will mean that a conservative presidential administration will at least not take an actively hostile attitude towards Amtrak. Here's the kicker, though. Just because Amtrak isn't mentioned in Project 2025 doesn't mean that Amtrak would be unaffected by an implemented Project 2025. There are a couple of areas where an implemented Project 2025 would have an impact on Amtrak. The first area where Amtrak would be affected is the changes to track inspection protocols. The playbook on page 636 says, quote, "Although FRA could adopt a modern inspection program that takes advantage of technological ways to inspect track, it is refusing to amend 50-year-old track inspection requirements, leaving customers with higher costs," end quote. FRA, for the record, refers to the Federal Railroad Administration. I have no idea what this modern inspection program would entail, but regardless of what it would entail, any rail inspection regulatory changes would likely impact rail tracks that Amtrak runs on as well. As to whether the impacts would be positive or negative, I'm not sure. If anyone listening to this video happens to have some expertise on rail inspection policies. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this subject in the comment section below. Certainly, if Project 2025 wants to in any way relax rail inspection standards, that could have an adverse impact on rail safety, both freight and passenger rail alike. But track inspections are not the only rail safety protocols under question in Project 2025. Their document also said the following, quote, FRA will be proposing certification requirements for dispatchers and signal employees, despite the failure of the Railroad Safety Advisory Committee, RSAC, to identify any safety benefit, end quote. For the record, since Project 2025's release, the safety benefits of said regulations on dispatchers and signal employees has been outlined publicly. Furthermore, I feel like Project 2025 is almost suggesting that there shouldn't be certification requirements for dispatchers and rail signal employees. If I'm correct in jumping to that conclusion, I guess my question for the Project 2025 folks is this. If you don't feel certification requirements are the answer for ensuring that dispatchers and signal employees are managing train traffic safely, what do you propose to ensure that train traffic is managed safely? It's a question I ask out of genuine curiosity and concern, because it is important to make sure that dispatchers and signal employees do their job safely so that both freight rail and Amtrak alike can operate without accidents caused by mistakes among dispatchers and signal employees. While there are a couple of areas where Amtrak could be affected in an implemented Project 2025, particularly from an operational safety standpoint, there are multiple ways that I think an implemented Project 2025 would be harmful and disastrous for local and regional rail systems. The first problematic proposal from a local and regional rail perspective is a land use one. On page 511, the Project 2025 playbook says that, quote, Congress should prioritize any and all legislative support for the single-family home, end quote. I understand the rationale for this policy priority. Living in a single-family home is often considered to be part of the American dream. But from a standpoint of encouraging land use that is most likely to result in more reliable mass transit, prioritizing single-family homes above all else is anything but a dream. The sorts of single-family homes that Project 2025 probably wants is lower density and results in lower mass transit usage. In reality, what we need for high levels of mass transit use, including rail use, is higher density development concentrated near mass transit facilities, something known as transit-oriented planning in urban planning circles. It is no coincidence that areas with higher population density you don't get with single-family housing, such as New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, and Chicago, have somewhat extensive rail systems. If we want a reality where the land use encourages people and municipalities to rely on our cars for just about everything, to the detriment of traffic, road conditions, and the environment, something I don't think the Project 2025 people care that much about, then Project 2025 is terrific. This is bad, but believe me, I have even worse news for local and regional rail transit and Project 2025. There's the fact that Project 2025 clearly does not see improving public transit of any form, bus or rail, as a priority. That is clear when they identify the biggest transportation challenges as, quote, the high cost of personal automobiles, especially in an era of high inflation, unpredictable and expensive commercial shipping by rail, air, and sea, and infrastructure spending that does not match the types of transportation that most Americans prefer. End quote. Many cities and towns could use better mass transit, yet there is nothing about mass transit that is mentioned as a transportation challenge. That stinks. What also stinks is what Project 2025 proposes to do to the transportation grant-making process. Currently, transit agencies receive the grants directly from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And to verify that I am correct on that score, I came across announcements from the major transit agencies in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, all announcing that they received grants from the U.S. Department of Transportation. What Project 2025 proposes instead is for, I quote, U.S. Congress to send transportation grants to each of the 50 states and allow each state to purchase transportation services that it thinks are best, end quote. While I somewhat understand the rationale of giving states more autonomy rather than sending money directly to transit entities, my concern is that in practice, this will only result in states more hostile to mass transit, not prioritizing mass transit in the monies they are given. And Project 2025 seems to imply that they would be more than okay with this. For they also say, quote, states that rely more on automotive transportation, for example, could use their funding to meet those needs, end quote. But I haven't even gotten to the worst part of Project 2025 from a local and regional rail transit perspective, and a mass transit perspective more broadly. The worst part, and the part I want to dedicate a decent amount of time to in this video, is that Project 2025 wants to remove federal subsidies for transit spending. A blunt way of putting it, Project 2025 wants the federal government to defund mass transit systems. For mass transit agencies, that would remove a source of funding, thus creating a hole in mass transit system budgets. I'm just going to call it as I see it. It feels like Project 2025 absolutely despises transit systems at the local and regional levels. As to why Project 2025 wants to do something so ridiculous, they give two rationales. First, the makers of the document believe that Americans are moving away from use of public transit since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, citing that October 2022 ridership on public transit is 64% of what it was in October 2019. Second, the makers of the document believe that subsidizing mass transit has generally been bad policy from a fiscal standpoint. On the first point, it is true that public transit ridership has not recovered to pre-COVID levels. But recovery has continued, even since October 2022. The American Public Transit Association reported that as of late 2023, ridership on public transit has recovered to 77% of pre-COVID levels, a significant improvement from the 64% of pre-COVID level ridership that existed as of fall 2022. This recovery somewhat undermines one of the premises Project 2025 used to propose slashing subsidies for public transit. The authors of Project 2025 proposed to slash public transit subsidies partly under the premise that people have moved away from public transit and aren't coming back. Yet, the reality is that people moved away from public transit for one reason or another with COVID-19, but are gradually coming back. On the second point, the point that Project 2025 believes that subsidizing mass transit is bad fiscally, I disagree. Yes, government has to subsidize mass transit to some fiscal cost, but the reduced traffic, cleaner air, reduced wear and tear on the roads, and provision of a safer mode of transit than driving all make the cost worth it, in my opinion. And any conservatives who are skeptical of my arguments on this front should listen to my video on why conservatives should support passenger rail. While the video was passenger rail specific, I think my argument applies to all forms of public transit, including subways, light rail, regional commuter rail, and yes, even buses. Essentially, Project 2025 proposes slashing funding for local and regional public transit based on a misguided premise and a lack of understanding of the benefits public transit brings, even to constituencies Republicans need in order to win this election. Constituencies like Maricopa County, Arizona, which contains Phoenix. It's a swing county in a swing state Trump needs to win, and a swing state for Senate the Republican candidate might need to win in order for the Republicans to regain a majority in the United States Senate. I could be wrong, but I don't think telling the folks of Maricopa County that the federal government looks to remove all their funding from Phoenix's transit system is a winning strategy. Just a hunch. So what's my verdict on Project 2025 when it comes to rail transit? Let's just cut to the chase. It sucks. I have questions and concerns about their proposals around rail safety and what it could mean for Amtrak. I am also extremely alarmed as to what an implemented Project 2025 would mean for rail transit at the local and regional levels. I sincerely hope the vision for the transportation portion of Project 2025 does not get implemented by a Republican presidential administration. And if Trump gets elected, I hope that he does not take Project 2025 seriously. But I think transit advocates need to do more than just say we oppose Project 2025's proposals. We need to propose an alternative vision, and I may use a future video to outline that vision for rail transit in the United States. What are your thoughts on Project 2025 and how it impacts rail transit? Feel free to leave your comments on this in the comment section below. Also, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and have a good day.